What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and it's no secret that 2023 has been an insane year for companies across the board when it comes to making content. A lot of stuff is failing, and the things that are succeeding are because they're adapting the values of the past instead of embracing the current day. A good example is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 or Godzilla Minus One. Two movies that don't look to inject messages or pander but to entertain. And because of this, these movies have done well and are celebrated. Of course, these decisions are made by the people at the top of the food chain, and if reports are to be believed, places like Disney might be getting ready to change their leadership sooner rather than later. Beyond this, after the Elon Musk FU viral moment, Twitter is now finding themselves in a battle for ad revenue, and the hostile takeover of Disney gets a spicy update. I am just drowning in information at this point, so let's keep it simple and go one thing at a time. To begin, it's been all but confirmed that Disney's CEO has made it clear he will be exiting Disney due to the ongoing failures of the company. Bob Iger is currently set to keep his position until at least 2026, but with the way things are going currently, it doesn't seem very likely that Bob will even survive long enough in his position to reach his departure date. Screen Rant had this article titled, "Disney CEO Bob Iger confirms exit plans amid studio's lackluster box office run." This comes as insider sources claim that Bob Iger is overwhelmed by the crushing failure of Disney's misfires. The Little Mermaid remake, Haunted Mansion, Indiana Jones, The Marvels, and Wish are just some of the massive failures we've seen this year alone. Bob Iger claims the reason for the failures of Disney right now do not fall on him but previous CEO Bob Chapek. But like any good CEO, Iger is a master of blending truth with lies in order to spin narratives that benefit his position. A reminder that Iger was CEO of Disney from 2005 to 2020 before he retired. But like I've said in other videos, the content made by companies is obviously planned years in advance. So anything Disney was making during Chapek's very short run as CEO were mostly things written and signed off on by Bob Iger and not Chapek. Anything Chapek would have actually gave the okay to get made wouldn't really come to fruition until 2024 at the earliest. So when Iger suddenly comes back and says, well, all of these failures aren't my fault, it's my predecessors, he's lying to you, is what I'm saying. Iger did confirm that he is absolutely going to be stepping down as CEO in 2026 when his contract expires, and that Disney is currently seeking to find out who should become the leader of the company once Iger is gone for good. In Variety's article, they quote Bob Iger saying that he was disappointed in what he was seeing when he returned as CEO, and tried to distance himself from the decisions that were being made in his brief absence. One of the things Iger immediately got rid of was the DMED, which stands for Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution Division, which Bob Chapek created when he was CEO to oversee content distribution and monetization, which was a separate group that worked independently from the actual production of the content that was being made. But that got eliminated once Iger returned, and in 2023 alone, Disney has slashed 8,000 jobs across their company, which was done in order to cut around $5.5 billion in costs per year, but even then, that hasn't been enough. Not to mention last year we had other flops like Lightyear and Strange World, which seemed like modest failures in the wake of things like The Marvels and Wish. In 2023 alone, these losses have accumulated to around $900 million in losses for Disney. If you add the 2022 flops, yeah, that number just skyrockets. But according to Screen Rant and Variety, Bob Iger is mentally exhausted from the crushing failures of a company he proudly served for over 15 years at this point. And the flops have no end in sight, and even though Iger is slated to stay as CEO until 2026, the way things are going, he likely won't even make it until then if things continue the way they are. Iger could be forced to be removed by his board if they feel his leadership is lacking. The other likely scenario that's currently brewing right now is the hostile takeover that keeps growing larger with every passing week in Disney's rearview mirror. Disney is trying to push a narrative that the hostile takeover, which is being pushed by Ike Perlmutter, who used to run Marvel Studios, and actually sold the company to Disney back in the day, is only seeking this takeover of Disney due to being fired earlier in 2023. Perlmutter is working with Nelson Peltz, who's another billionaire who owns Treon, and they are seeking to use their millions of shares within Disney to strong-arm the company into bending the knee. They want seats on the board so that they can actively be a part of the decision-makings of Disney's future. But the Disney board has rejected that desire even though they recently got 2 more people to join their board, which likely pissed Perlmutter and Peltz off even more, so that's not helping anything. Nelson Peltz and his company Treon just said it plainly when asked for their opinion by The Hollywood Reporter, to which they said, and I quote, "Since we gave Disney the opportunity to prove it could right the ship last February up to our re-engagement weeks ago, shareholders lost $70 billion of value. Investor confidence is low, key strategic questions loom, and even Disney CEO is acknowledging that the company's challenges are greater than previously believed." With James Gorman and Sir Jeremy Darroch representing an improvement from the status quo, the addition of these directors will not, in our view, restore investor confidence or address the root cause behind the significant value destruction and missteps that this board has overseen. Treon intends to take our case for change directly to shareholders, end quote. While Disney has assured their shareholders that they expect pre-COVID levels of cash flow in 2024, it's become apparent that these statements are just falling on deaf ears. The entire company is reeling, and every day new leaks are spewing out of Mickey Mouse's kingdom. If Perlmutter and Peltz have their way, they could end up becoming the silver bullet that takes out Bob Iger well before his projected leave in 2026. Cause like Treon said, the company has lost $70 billion in value from February 2023 till December 23. And if you saw my previous videos, I already reported that from 2022 to early 2023, Disney already lost 56% of their value already, which amounts to around $150 billion. So now we're getting concrete info that they basically lost another quarter of their value in 2023 again. Which means if you are a Disney shareholder and you look at the facts, you would be livid when realizing your shares have dropped in value by around 75% basically in around a full year and a bit. That's insanely bad, but that's the cost of pushing the message, dear viewer. Bob Iger is also trying to spin a story that the failure of Disney is because of the whole Florida versus Disney scenario, where Governor Ron DeSantis pushed what woke weirdos call the Don't Say Gay bill. That bill, if you don't know, makes it mandatory that children grade 3 and below are not exposed to anything involving gender identity or any nonsense like that. This has clearly pissed off many woke weirdos because they know children are more vulnerable to indoctrination the younger they are. And obviously, the sooner you invoke these ideas into their impressionable minds, the more easily those concepts become the status quo in future generations. So Florida's government said no, and that has pissed off Disney greatly, since a large export of their content in the past few years has been nothing but the message. But what's crazier to me is that Bob Iger tries to spin this story by saying Florida rejecting the ability to indoctrinate children is somehow a direct attack to Disney and others' rights of freedom of speech. You heard that right. Disney is now trying to play the card that it's their right to indoctrinate your children. That's a bold play, dear viewer. Let's hear what Bob Iger has to say about that. Via Bounding Into Comics, Iger said this during the Deal Summit interview, and I quote, "The position that we took with Governor DeSantis in Florida was simply this. The company, while I was gone, decided to take a position against the falsely labeled Don't Say Gay bill that was moving through the Florida legislature. I won't comment on what I would have done or not done, but the company took that position against it. The governor decided he got very angry at the company when it took that position, and decided to punish the company by stripping it of essentially the entity that manages the property that Disney World is on. Then he decided that was impractical, so he would just take out the board and put his own board in. We felt that was a direct result of the company having exercised its right to free speech, taking the position against the Don't Say Gay bill, and that punishing us for exercising our right to free speech was anti-American and anti-business. And I felt that it was really important for us to stand up for our rights and simply ask the question. It wasn't about the Don't Say Gay bill at that point, it was about, does the company have a right to free speech? And if it exercises that right to free speech, it should not be facing a retribution because it has done, and that's what we have thought was going on. So there's a lawsuit that we filed that is very specific to that," end quote. Wow, okay, so it's incredible that we've reached the point where a company filled with woke weirdos is now trying to use the concept of free speech as a cop-out to scapegoat their way into saying it's wrong that they're not allowed to push ideology anymore. That's rich, coming from a mega corporation that, like many others, have been vocal about reducing people's rights to free speech. It's also ironic given that companies like Disney will not even hire people if they vocally speak out or support anything right-wing. which, by their own standards, would be a violation of someone's right to free speech. So, this is a classic example of the rule should apply to everyone I disagree with, but when it comes to me, I should be allowed free reign. That's incredible that it's gotten to this point, but if that were true, then Disney wouldn't be an echo chamber of liberal ideology, and would instead be open to hiring people of any political leaning. But you know, as well as I do, that when it comes to Western movies, games, or TV, the large consensus is that everyone working there is either openly woke or liberal, or they hide their true opinions simply to ensure they aren't fired or blacklisted. So the conundrum we find ourselves in is this: how can you be pro-free speech when everything you stand for advocates against the very foundations of that concept? You can't is the answer, otherwise we'd have conservative voices flowing freely within these companies too, which we clearly do not have right now. Even when you have certain stars out there that are openly religious and pro-family, like Chris Pratt for example, he has to toe that line and say he's not fully conservative, which he absolutely is. But if he admits that, he could lose opportunities. He's a clear example of someone who has to basically lie so he isn't blacklisted, and it's pathetic that this is what our society has become these days. This is a company ran by a man who talks out of both sides of his mouth. Since on one hand, Iger has publicly stated that his company will not advertise on places like X due to Twitter's political leanings. Which, by the way, X or Twitter has no political leaning. Bob Iger is just against that platform allowing people to have free speech, which is ironic for obvious reasons. Because if X's ability to have free speech is a problem and it's Disney's moral duty to pull advertising, then equally so, it's justified that Disney's free speech is not being attacked by not allowing them to push ideology on children in Florida, for example. It's incredible how the more you look into the mind virus and you really start to dissect it, the less it makes any sense. And I guarantee these people know it falls apart if you pick it apart critically, but they can't say that, otherwise they'll get fired. And it's clear Disney at least isn't adhering to their own morals since they use X and their accounts on it to promote their movies and shows constantly. They also use it with platforms like ESPN, which they own, so it's morally correct to not use X for advertising, but it's fine to use it to promote your product. Okay, well, interesting is what I'll say. So much for free speech, I guess, but then again, you have Elon Musk, who's currently in a battle with advertisers over his comments that went viral. According to Variety, X is in damage control mode following Elon's comments, and the CEO, whose name is Linda Yaccarino, had to publicly explain what was happening in order to calm the storm. She said, and I quote, "X is enabling an information independence that's uncomfortable for some people. We are a platform that allows people to make their own decisions. And here's my perspective when it comes to advertising. X is standing at a unique and amazing intersection of free speech and Main Street. And the X community is powerful and is here to welcome you. To our partners who believe in our meaningful work, thank you." End quote. It's that one part where she states that X allowing free speech is uncomfortable for some people, when what she really means is companies are not okay with it because it goes against the agenda. Notice how Twitter had all the ad revenue back when it silenced people for wrongthink. But the moment it allowed people to actually ask questions, now it's problematic. I find that really interesting. Elon Musk also publicly agreed with a journalist named Glenn Greenwald, who publicly stated themselves that Elon was right in what he said to Disney. He said, and I quote, "What went wrong here is not what Elon Musk said. It's so revealing that so many journalists are aghast that anyone would dare tell Disney and major corporations to go F themselves when they're trying to limit, censor, and control the flow of political content. If you aren't willing to say that to corporations who are trying to limit what you can say, don't bother calling yourself a journalist. We need way more journalists willing to say go F yourself to people who try and limit what they say. The problem is that the people who are hired by these major media corporations and who thrive in them and succeed in them are people who have the opposite instinct. Their instinct is to assuage and serve and placate establishment power, not to defy it, even though the purpose of journalism is to be adversarial to establishment power. Once journalism started getting corporatized, no longer owned by families dedicated to journalism or local communities, but by major corporations that have all kinds of other interests besides their media division, and what kind of attributes are awarded at major corporations. People who avoid controversy, who avoid conflict, who avoid displeasing and angering powerful people. That's the corporate ethos, and the corporatization of media meant that that kind of attribute was imported into journalism. And that's why almost no one who works for large media corporations or the media corporations themselves has the courage to say this. They're shocked. They think it's a sign that he's unhinged when in reality, it's just a sign of how cowardly and craven they are, end quote. And what Glenn said there is right. Journalism has become controlled by the very people they were meant to critique. And this is why companies like Disney or Amazon and others will push to pander whenever they can. They will use their power to spin stories to make it seem like things are better than they actually are, when they very clearly are not. And when people like Bob Iger attempt to say their freedom of speech is being limited, it's nothing but irony coming from people like him. The problem for places like Disney, at least, is that people are waking up. And they are starting to ask more questions and see things for what they really are instead of what they're being told to see instead. So whether it comes down to Disney's downfall financially or culturally, the endgame removal of Bob Iger as CEO or saying Florida is somehow reducing their free speech, it's all nonsense. A shroud of darkness designed to be thrown into the eyes of consumers in order to confuse them long enough until the next socially engineered message is ready to be delivered. The world doesn't have a free speech problem, but it definitely has a corporation-led agenda that's hell-bent on ruining everything problem. And the more we all speak out against it, the better our society can and will become. Or we could become like how the UK is when it comes to the blatant historical revisionism that is gripping them with an iron fist. All over the British entertainment spectrum are blatant examples of genuinely false depictions designed to push agendas. Very recently, in the latest Doctor Who special, you had Sir Isaac Newton being played by an actor who very clearly looks nothing even remotely close to what the actual man looked like. But unlike America, and to some extent with Canada, the British populace effectively is not allowed to speak out against these things without fear of retaliation. They are being forced to accept false truths and are ridiculed or punished if they attempt to exercise their free speech. The way the UK in general adheres to the mind virus is very much the same as companies like Disney are when it comes to their employees. I guarantee you many people within the UK do not agree with the nonsense going on in their country, nor do they agree with historical revisionism. But like an employee at Disney or a game studio like Insomniac who makes games like Spider-Man, there is a legitimate toll that you will pay if you question these ideologies. And that is an actual threat to the concept of free speech. Unlike Bob Iger, who believes it's Disney's constitutional right to be able to warp the minds of impressionable children with their agenda. Children should be left alone, in my opinion. We should refrain from pushing any ideology or concept of the real world like death or disease into their minds for as long as we can. Let them live free and be what they are, which is obviously a young child. They don't need to be educated on multiple pronouns and genders, and knowing the socio-economic state of the world when they're in grade 2. We've already seen the end result of children being raised in these circumstances already. It's why you have so many younger people these days who think their goal in life is to advocate and become activists. We have actual generations of working people being born and raised into genuine victim mindsets from the moment they gain actual consciousness. And that's really messed up to me. As someone born in '92, I'm thankful I wasn't raised or indoctrinated like this. I got to simply play and be a kid. I got to enjoy things around me like toys and comics, instead of being told there's infinite genders. And the media I consumed on TV didn't push concepts like reparations or telling me I'm terrible because of my skin color. Instead, I grew up on things like Art Attack or Reboot and stuff like Beast Wars. I got to be an actual kid, which sadly the kids of today are losing that window of beautiful, blissful childhood more and more. And the endgame goal here by these companies is to ensure the concept of freedom of speech is eradicated within the minds of every child in the world. They aren't being born to excel and become something that can change the world. Instead, the children of today are simply raised to exist, have victim mindsets, and keep their mouths shut unless they want to be excommunicated from the group. That's not a future we need, and places like Disney are reeling in profits because they've erased what made them who they are. They no longer make content for families, but the woke activist weirdos with hairy armpits and bad haircuts. And the people who refuse to have kids because they keep getting told the world is overpopulated by the same politicians who each have multiple children themselves. The world is a dark place, I know, But it doesn't have to be always, and the more we push back, the better we can make this for the next generation. Many have lost hope, but not me. We can win this, we just gotta stick together. And until then, dear viewer, I urge you to keep your mind clear and take care of yourselves. Thanks to my patrons, and subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.